Good evening and welcome to the next episode of Kensuke's Kingdom by Michael Morpurgo. Now yesterday our hero Michael and his dog had been washed up in chapter 4 on a desert island, all alone. I was weak all over. I looked all about me. The wide blue sea was as empty as the cloudless sky above. No Peggy Sue, no boat, nothing, no one. I called again and again for my mother and my father. I called until the tears came and I could call no more, until I knew there was no point. I stood there for some time trying to work out how I had got here, how it was that I'd survived. I had such confused memories of being picked up, of being on board the Peggy Sue, but I knew now I couldn't have been. I must have dreamt it, dreamt the whole thing. I must have clung to my football and kept myself afloat until I was washed up. I thought of my football then, but it was nowhere to be seen. Stella, of course, was unconcerned about all the whys and wherefores. She kept bringing me sticks to throw and would go galloping after them into the sea without a care in the world. Then came the howling again from the trees. And the hackles went up on Stella's neck. She charged up the beach, barking and barking, until she was sure she had silenced the last of the echoes. It was a musical, plaintive howling this time, not at all menacing. I thought I recognised it. I had heard howling like it once before on a visit to London Zoo. Gibbons, funky Gibbons, my father had called them. I still don't know why to this day, but I loved the sound of the word funky. Perhaps that was why I remembered what they were. "It's only Gibbons," I told Stella. "Just funky Gibbons. They won't hurt us." But I couldn't be at all sure I was right. From where I now stood, I could see that the forest grew more sparsely up the side of a great hill some way inland, and it occurred to me then that if I could reach the bare, croppy, rocky outcrop at the summit, I would be able to see further out to sea. Or perhaps there'd be some house or farm further inland, or maybe a road, and I could find someone to help. But I left the beach and they came back looking for me. What then if they came back? I decided I would have to take that chance. I set off at a run, Stella Artois at my heels, and soon found myself in the cooling shade of the forest. I discovered a narrow track going uphill in the right direction, I thought, so I followed it, only slowing to a walk when the hill became too steep. The forest was alive with creatures. Birds cackled and screeched high above me, and always the howling wailed and wafted through the trees. But more distantly now. It wasn't the sounds of the forest that bothered me, though. It was the eyes. I felt as if I was being watched by 1,000 inquisitive eyes. I think Stella did too, for she had been strangely quiet ever since we entered the forest, constantly glancing up at me for reassurance and comfort. I did my best to give it, but she could sense that I too was frightened. What had seemed at first to be a short hike now felt more like a great expedition into the interior. We emerged exhausted from the trees, clambered laboriously up a rocky scree, and stood at long last on the peak. So they got up to the top of the mountain. The sun was blazing down. I had not really felt the burning heat of it until then. I scanned the horizon. If there was a sail somewhere out in the haze, I could not see it. And then it came to me that even if I were to see the sail of a ship, what could I do? I couldn't light a fire. I had no matches. I knew about cavemen rubbing sticks together, but I'd never tried it. I looked all around me. Sea, sea, and sea. nothing but sea on all sides. I was on an island, and I was alone. The island looked perhaps 2 or 3 miles in length, no more. It was shaped a bit like an elongated peanut, but longer at one end than the other. There was a long swathe of brilliant white beach on both sides of the island, and at the far end another hill, the slopes steeper and more thickly wooded, but not so high as mine. With the exception of these twin peaks, the entire island seemed to be covered in forest, and we can see, look back at the map now that we have of the island. He says the island is peanut shaped, and this is where Michael must be standing as he looked upon the island. So the island is covered on beaches from both sides. So far as I could see, there was no sign of any human life. Even then, as I stood there that first morning, filled with apprehension at the terrifying implications of my dreadful situation, I remember thinking how wonderful it was. A green jewel of an island framed in white, the sea all about it a silken shimmering blue. Strangely, perhaps comforted somehow by the extraordinary beauty of the place, I wasn't at all downhearted. On the contrary, I felt strangely elated. I was alive. Stella Artois was alive. We had survived.